Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex was a video game released in the early 2000s, being Crash's debut onto the 6th generation of consoles. Following Naughty Dog's departure from the franchise they once created, Universal now owned the rights to Crash Bandicoot, and they charged Traveller's Tales with the task of making the next Crash game. This game was the continuation of Crash Bandicoot for the new game consoles at the turn of the century. Expectations were extremely high. While I had no experience playing the older Crash games when I first played Wrath of Cortex, I still really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much in fact that I replayed it in 2014, beating the game's full 106%. I used to love this game. However, as I've grown older, my understanding of games has changed, and games I previously held high in my list of favourite games have fell significantly. Wrath of Cortex is not exempt from this. While some consider it to have always been a mediocre title, it has definitely not stood the test of time. A lot of people claim that they hate this game, usually followed by harsh criticism. This video will be giving my general opinion about the game, defending it against hate in some areas while also being critical of the parts that are genuinely not fun to play. While I won't be as inherently critical as those, I will still put the game under the microscope and give it a somewhat thorough evaluation. Any gameplay shown has been recorded firsthand on the GameCube version, unless mentioned otherwise. The reason I chose the GameCube version is because I don't currently own a PS2. I have the Xbox version of the game, but not a console to play it on. In addition to this, I am recording gameplay through a composite cable opposed to HDMI. While HDMI is the far superior choice for high definition gameplay, the GameCube only has an analog output port. This may leave the gameplay a bit blurry, so I apologise in advance for any low quality gameplay. With that out of the way, let's move into the game. So after turning on the console, we immediately see a load screen. This is where the hate for the game comes from, and is partly responsible for why it is such an infamous entry into the series. The game can take upwards from 15 seconds to load, and that only loads the title screen and intro animation. After creating a save file, a cutscene is played. This cutscene explains the story to the player. Uka Uka is informing the villains about how bad they are at their job. After a prolonged and awkward conversation, Cortex reluctantly reveals his new weapon, Crunch Bandicoot, designed with the intent of being able to eliminate Crash. Uka Uka briefly mentions the Elementals, entities that used to control the natural elements of the world before being locked away. Uka Uka frees them off screen, and this sets up the very basic plot for the game. We then see Crash, Coco and Aku Aku for the first time. Aku Aku looks a bit different, as does Crash. His colours look a lot sharper and contrasting than they did before. With eruptions occurring followed by storms and tidal waves, Aku Aku travels to Uka Uka, assuming that he is the cause of these natural disasters. Aku Aku expresses deep concern, referencing a time where these masks were free and would cause destruction for fun. After briefly being attacked by the masks, Aku Aku travels back to Crash and Coco to inform them of the elementals. He tells them that they need to collect ancient crystals to send the elemental masks back to their hibernation state, 5 crystals per mask. And with that, Crash sets out to collect the crystals and seal away these masks once again. Honestly, until I replayed the game, I forgot this cutscene existed. It's not really worth watching, as the plot often feels disconnected from the gameplay anyway, and for an opening cutscene, it sort of overstays its welcome, lasting about 10 minutes. Unless you want to understand the shallow story this game has to offer, you're not missing much by skipping it. The character models definitely look like early PS2 models, jagged, sharp, nightmare fuel. I can definitely see where these models could be improved. The eyes in particular look very unusual. They seem to dart around a lot randomly and sometimes just look at the roof. Anyway, enough about early 6th gen graphics. After the first level loads, you immediately notice that it's an ice level, which doesn't match the theme of the chamber. The other levels aren't very relevant either, being a plain level, a jungle level, and a castle level. Besides the unusual theme, the first level is fine. It definitely feels like it belongs in a Crash game, and there is some variety found in the enemies here, including penguins, skiers, and narwhals. An optional death route is also present at the end of the level here, if the player does well enough on their first attempt, providing the player with the blue gem if they successfully clear it. The platforming featured throughout the level is basic, setting the bar for platforming difficulty to scale. The level comes with an okay soundtrack, but for some reason the song ends then restarts abruptly instead of looping. This leaves a weird effect on the gameplay as it breaks immersion. Overall, I don't mind Arctic Antics. The types of levels that feature platforming with no vehicles are done pretty well gameplay wise. Another example of basic platforming being done well is found in my favourite level, the Gauntlet. It has an amazing soundtrack supporting it, as well as solid platforming and reasonably challenging level hazards, including large swinging axes, rotating knives and trapdoors littering the floor, making the level worthy of the name it carries. The death route for this level provides a massive ramp in difficulty for the player. This also makes the level feel rewarding to complete, gems and all. Other levels in the game straight up hand you gems. I mean, Avalanche could have been a somewhat acceptable level if it didn't have a chase part at the end with an easy gem. This takes away any rewarding feeling, as you'll most likely collect this gem on your first playthrough of the level. By the time the player gets to this point in the game, it becomes apparent that the levels to only feature platforming are executed much better than those that try to integrate vehicle gameplay to the point where it feels forced. Fahrenheit Frenzy is one of these levels that forces vehicle gameplay. It starts in a mediocre vehicle and continues into an extended platforming segment. At first, there is this helipad that you need to pilot through a tight cave, and for some reason it has inverted Y-axis controls, and it moves forward with the A button and backwards with the X button. It just feels unnatural and uncomfortable. I mean, it's not hard, and an average player should be able to inch their way along, avoiding anything that could be a threat. The reason I don't really like this level is because it provides you with a vehicle that you have had no time to control and will never come up again, if we ignore level 27, which isn't needed for any percent completion anyway. In my opinion, the Jeep racing level should have been replaced with a level dedicated to teaching the player the helipack. Or even if this level started with Crash on foot, it would have been a much better level. The only thing I can't fault this level on is the attention to visual detail. The red haze seen throughout the stage, combined with the fire vents and flowing lava, really creates the atmosphere that this level was going for. There's even this X-ray part, and although it might be brief, it makes the level unique and memorable. By the way, I love this death animation. Forcing vehicle gameplay into these levels is a shame, because this isn't the only example. There are other levels that could have been so much better if they didn't have forced vehicle segments. The only vehicle levels I can really appreciate are the ball levels. Bamboozled is the first level in the game to feature the ball, and to be honest, it's a really good level. The ball is very responsive because it knows when resistance needs to be applied, but also when acceleration needs to be applied. The level isn't too hard, as the map gives the player enough space to get accustomed to the ball physics, which is necessary this early in the game. In this sense, the level could be considered an extension of the ball gameplay itself, which is crucial when you are introducing a new vehicle. The level design is executed properly to incorporate the gameplay while still having an enjoyable experience. The placement of nitro crates provides a challenge when coupled with the clever box placement to make collecting the gem here challenging. The ball reappears in 2 levels, with each level increasing in difficulty. It's nice to see a vehicle implemented properly, reused in moderation, and become more challenging with each additional level. But here is where the video turns sour. The next levels I will be covering are the underwater levels. These incredibly unpleasant levels are not enjoyable to play in the slightest. There is no exaggeration to be found when I say that these levels are the worst levels to ever be put into a Crash game. A lot of people seem to bash on Wrath of Cortex for its load times or its graphics, but I'm a reasonable person. These don't directly impact gameplay. I can excuse waiting a bit longer for a level or dealing with early PS2 graphics. What I can't excuse is poor level and gameplay design. There are only 3 of these levels, however this doesn't excuse them. I would happily have more underwater levels in Wrath of Cortex if the submarine didn't move so sluggishly. The submarine is probably the largest vehicle in the game, and the environment of the level does not change to compensate. I explained just now how Bamboozled had fun gameplay because the level was designed around the concept of the ball. It seems here that they came up with the level first and the vehicle after. The area for the sub to navigate is too small, so more often than not you'll find that your movement is heavily restricted. And because the screen is limited in size and the vehicle moves ridiculously slow, you'll find that a lot of the enemies here are killing you because the game leaves you minimal time to react. Instead of the game using unique enemies, it just uses fish that fly out of nowhere. Because of this, death is almost certain with every movement you make in these levels. In fact, I entered Coral Canyon with about 40 lives, and I ended with 17. A small portion of these underwater levels are controlled by Crash equipped with diving gear. It can feel even more awkward to break boxes here, because when you spin you have little control over your speed, which could result in you flying straight into a lone TNT or nitro crate. Seashell Shenanigans and Coral Canyon are pretty similar, but H2O now has you controlling the submarine for the first half of the level before transitioning into regular platforming. Why have the submarine here? It doesn't add to the gameplay or the enjoyment. It doesn't make sense. When you continue platforming normally, the level isn't very good either. It's very colourless and therefore lifeless. The platforming can be tricky, but that's only because the boxes are so small that one wrong jump costs you a life. The second chamber is definitely not fun to play. However, there is one good thing to come out of it.
Hey, stop playing with my sister.
The Wrath of Cortex was the first Crash game to include Coco as a fully playable character in platforming segments. Coco is present in a couple of stages being Banzai Bonsai, Tsunami, Avalanche and Crasteroids. Her platforming operates slightly differently as she cannot double jump or tornado spin regardless of Crash's currently unlocked abilities. Coco has an improved ground slam allowing her to jump higher and slam harder. She has 3 vehicles, 2 of which are means to initiate chase sequences, being a scooter and a snowboard. The other being a spaceship which controls similarly to Crash's plane but with tighter turning. Banzai Bonsai is probably my favourite of these levels, being a respectable challenge to give the player the chance to get used to Coco's controls, even if she does control nearly identical to Crash. The Japanese theme of the level is very apparent here, with the word Banzai even referring to a battle cry given out by Japanese warriors. The enemy variety here is impressive enough to be mentioned. It features cranes, ninjas, koi fish, lizards, and these guys who hit gongs, gong hitters. Although Coco's platforming is debatably inferior due to the lack of a double jump or tornado spin, it still does everything right. Ultimately, these abilities aren't even needed as the level design is considerate of a lack in mobility, and even though it might be an experimental gameplay type, it still does a lot of things right. But regardless of how good this stage is, the second chamber is still my least favourite. The final part of this video will cover the bosses. After beating a set of 5 levels, a boss will be unlocked, which needs to be beaten in order to progress to the next chamber. The first boss is pretty boring to be honest, it's definitely the worst. It takes the ball from level 3 and puts you in a bowl-like arena, facing off against Crunch with the aid of Rocco. Rocks will spawn in the arena and you have to collide with them to turn them blue. When all of the rocks turn blue, Crunch takes damage. Do this 3 times and you win. If Crunch hits the player, then you lose a significant amount of health. If Crunch hits any rocks, then they turn orange and colliding with them will deal additional damage. It's a very random fight. It can take 2 minutes to beat or 10 minutes to beat. The fight doesn't justify itself. It takes a great vehicle and places it in an awful arena. When you combine the ball physics with a bowl-like arena, it gives you little control over your speed. You're just going to see your speed increase exponentially. And compared to how the other masks demonstrate their power, Rocco is very weak.
Ah, the triumphant hero Crash, reduced to a pile of smoldering ash.
Ah! Get over here, you little orange sponge! Well, looks like the Bandicoot's been busy collecting crystals. I warned you, Bandicoot.
The second boss is somewhat better. Wawa possesses Crunch, creating this water demon-like Bandicoot, which looks amazing, but it's a boss that revolves around platforming. You platform towards Crunch and then spin attack him to deal damage. The platforming isn't hard at all, but it can give you a bit of a challenge the first time round. My main problem with the boss is that there's no random element. It attacks with the same patterns every time in every stage. You progress through the boss's stages and eventually the boss will die and you'll unlock a power up and progress to the next chamber. Honestly, I don't have a lot of gameplay for this part. When I encountered the boss for the first time in 6 years, I beat it on my first attempt. That's how easy this boss is. I mean, it at least takes skill, but it still has many areas it could be improved upon. Every segment of platforming is the same length. They could at least make them bigger. You inflict damage upon Crunch at the same time every time. It's just jump into him and spin. They could make it so you have to wait on more timings for Crunch, which would actually make the fight quite a lot harder. Anyway, the next 2 bosses are a lot better, and I mean a lot better. The third boss sees Crunch taking on a fire golem-like state after being possessed by Pyro. Crunch runs towards Crash, with a wall of fire just barely behind him. You have to jump over and dodge these volcanic rocks that are bowled towards you until you reach a mech with a spray gun, which you then control and chase Crunch with. You chase down Crunch until you can spray him with water, and then you progress to the next stage of the fight. This boss can be considered quite easy, but it's an improvement over the last one as the difficulty actually increases with every stage of the fight. On the second stage, when Crunch is running away from you, he'll begin to drop rocks, which instantly kill you if you touch them. And on the third stage, these rocks will start rolling towards you, making them even more of a threat. There's definitely an atmosphere to this fight that I can really appreciate. It's an atmosphere not found with any other boss in the game. This is definitely my favourite boss. I mean, it starts with Pyro taunting the player, then all of a sudden you're dropped into an arena and you hear this. The fourth boss sees Crunch take on a large godlike form after being possessed by Lolo. This is a plane boss. Crash has to use his plane to shoot at the boss until he's dead. The boss has simple patterns to avoid, and unfortunately, the fight doesn't become any harder as it progresses. If you hold down the fire button and just avoid attacks, the fight is normally over in about 3 minutes. While this gave me a bit of trouble the first time I fought it, Once you realise that it's only going to be repeating attacks, it becomes a lot less stressful and a lot more manageable. It's a two-dimensional fight in the sense that you only move left, right, up and down. There's no depth to it. This means that the fight isn't going to be too hard. The first encounter you have with this boss is definitely the best, which is quite different to the third boss, as that rewards you for being able to master it. There's nothing you can really do on your second try here that you didn't do on your first, besides take less damage, but that won't affect if you win the fight or not. While atmospheric pressure is still a lot better than drain damage and rumbling the rocks, it feels a bit generic. The final boss sees you taking on Crunch, Cortex and all of the elementals simultaneously. Crunch commands the elementals to attack you in a certain order, and after a number of attacks, Crunch will be stunned, so you can shoot him. This makes him punch Cortex for some reason, which allows you to damage him and progress in the fight. This is another fight that becomes more difficult as the fight progresses. The ramp for difficulty here is insane, to be honest. In the first stage, Crunch will only do 1 attack. In the second stage, he'll do 2 attacks. In the third stage, he'll do 4 attacks. But then in the final stage, he'll deal 8 attacks. Dying to any of these resets the fight, and this is where the difficulty comes in. I should probably mention what the different attacks do. Rocco will cause meteorites to rain, which I find I die to the most. These are seemingly random, and you just have to walk forward in a circle and hope for the best. Then he commands Wawa, who creates icy boulders, which can't actually hurt you, but they freeze you in place, leaving you very vulnerable. Pyro is up next, who ignites a certain fraction of the battlefield. This is normally easy to avoid, but you don't have a lot of time to react to it. I died to this a couple times, admittedly. And finally he commands Lolo, who triggers these electrical zappers, but you can just jump over them. As mentioned previously, the fabled 4th stage of the fight is definitely the hardest. It goes on for way too long. And what makes it worse is that sometimes you'll shoot Crunch with the bazooka, but it won't register, and you'll have to repeat the entire stage again. After beating the final boss, we unlock the ability to sprint, which is actually quite useful. It makes collecting platinum relics a lot easier, if not actually possible in some levels. We also unlock the hidden chamber of the warp room, where you can unlock 5 more levels by retrieving relics. After getting 25 relics, we unlock Nighttime, Ghost Town, Ice Station Bandicoot, Solar Bowler, and Force of Nature. But these aren't worth talking about, as they don't add anything new. They just reuse old vehicles that only came up once, like Coco Snowboard, the Helipack, and the Minecart. The only level I enjoy out of these 5 is Ghost Town, just because you get to see Crunch Bandicoot in a minecart. Otherwise, that's it for Wrath of Cortex. Complete 5 levels, fight a boss, repeat this 4 times, beat the game. If you're curious, I didn't get 106% when I played this game for the recording. I got about 87%. I wouldn't recommend trying to do it, especially if you've already done it before, as it doesn't feel rewarding in the slightest. At its core, the Wrath of Cortex is a mediocre game. It tries a lot of new things, but a lot of them seem to flop. Some of the new game modes are really fun to play, some of them are really bad. I do like playing as Coco, but I can't stand the underwater levels. I have masses of nostalgia for this game, but the unbiased approach reveals a game that doesn't really hold up today. It really is just a mediocre game. Would I recommend this game to casual players looking to experience Crash Bandicoot for the first time in years? No. Definitely not. Would I recommend this game to die-hard fans of the franchise who have yet to play this game? Yes. And would I recommend this game to those who adored it as a child like myself, but haven't touched it in almost 19 years? Yes. So this was my first experience with putting time and love into a YouTube video. I've never really made anything like this before, but I can say I've learned a lot. I've learned the basics of video editing, I've encountered problems with the microphone and I know how to overcome them, and I'm generally more informed about the development process of videos now. I do plan to create more videos like this in the future, so if you'd like to keep informed or updated, why not subscribe? I would appreciate it a lot. I've also made an Instagram account and Discord server. I'll be posting video previews and updates on my Discord, and I'll probably just end up posting whatever on my Instagram. Anyway, this has been a retrospective of Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, and I've been Flynny. Thank you for watching and stick around.